Does it say something about comic book fans that these days we don't just get excited about variant characters, we expect them? On one hand, an overdone trope is exhausting, but on the other hand, variants are so friggin' cool because they're reimagined takes on a character that can become stale given the perpetual publishing model of media in general. Different iterations of the same character can become part of a larger multiverse should you choose to view things from that perspective. And for this video, we really hope you do. Because it's not like the Council of Skeletors exists within Masters of the Universe franchise, but there are multiple variants of both its hero and its villain scattered across the decades. Without further ado, let's dive into the origin and fate of every variant of Skeletor in every He-Man universe. Pre-Filmation minicomic Skeletor 1981. The first iteration of Skeletor, the OG who debuted with the toy line, wasn't connected to He-Man's family or even Eternia for that matter. In the pre-Filmation He-Man continuity, Skeletor was an alien conqueror. He arrived on Eternia after a period of galactic upheaval known as the Great Wars. This is an era of He-Man history that's never quite explored beyond giving the series its setting and premise. The Great Wars are so devastating that they wipe out lives and ancient technology, plus magic, leaving behind the current Eternia, which is more bestial and barbaric in its makeup. The only structure on the planet that predates the wars is Castle Greyskull, which has this mystical energy lying deep inside it. This energy can be channeled through the power sword, but that sword is broken into two halves for safety, and only by unifying it can Castle Greyskull's dormant powers be unleashed. The sword and the castle are foundational elements of He-Man stories because synchronizing with the former using the latter is Skeletor's primary goal in most of his versions. In the original comics, he used a dimensional rift that was left behind by the Great War's perpetrators to bring an army of Inhumans to Eternia. His initial desire was to conquer the entire planet in a traditional conquest, but as he fought against and lost to He-Man and his allies over and over again, Skeletor's eyes shifted towards the throne of Castle Greyskull. In fact, he's the one who rarely identifies it as a pre-war era location, and being a sorcerer like the castle's protector sorceress, knows that its powers can remake the universe itself. In the early days of He-Man, each new toy drop was accompanied by a mini-comic, which is where we get all this lore from. Skeletor's early plans always saw him using He-Man's love interest, Teela, in a way to distract him, while his minions brought him to his heart's desire. But all of his plans kept failing. He actually got his hands on the Power Sword and made some headway into Castle Greyskull on numerous occasions, but he never quite united its two halves and became Emperor of the Universe. In fact, after exhausting all his conventional options, Skeletor decides to be a little unconventional and pull off a daring dimensional switch. He goes into the rift, places himself underneath Castle Greyskull within it, and then tries to bring himself back to Eternia in a way that allows him to enter Greyskull without walking into it. But at the last moment, he's interrupted by Trapjaw, who steals the power Skeletor was trying to steal in the first place. So, in an unexpected team-up, Skeletor fights alongside He-Man with both their halves of the Power Sword synced up to defeat Trapjaw. And unfortunately, that's the last time we see either of the original versions of the characters. There's no official resolution to the central conflict between He-Man and Skeletor, and the associated toy line is discontinued as well. DC Comics Skeletor, The Dark Lord, 1982. This version of Skeletor isn't extremely different from the one we previously described, because their goals and motivations remain exactly the same. Both of them still want the reality-altering powers of the Power Sword, access to Castle Greyskull, and He-Man's demise. Both of them are still skull-faced and flanked by their evil warriors, including such colorful characters like Beastman, Evil Lyn, and Merman. And both of them come from parts unknown to conquer Eternia and everything else in the universe. What this version of Skeletor has that makes him different from the first Skeletor is this Shakespearean aura that makes him feel more eloquent than he has any right to feel. Skeletor is basically Conan the Barbarian with a macabre aesthetic, but in the original mini-comic series, he spoke more like a warlord. Here, he feels like the version of Skeletor we've come to know and love over the decades, and he uses phrases like, "by all that is unholy," and calls himself the Dark Lord. The premise is different from the original continuity as well, because this miniseries was written by DC at the peak of their Infinite Worlds phase, and the He-Man universe became a part of the larger DC multiverse. He-Man's mom became an Earthling who crashed on Eternia by mistake, and there's a portal that directly connects Eternia to Earth, and Superman is part of the first two stories. He fights and loses to Skeletor in the first comic, and in the second one,
he recognizes Skeletor as the thief of the second half of the Power Sword. Oh, that's right. Because Earth is part of DC He-Man's continuity, the Power Sword's fragments are scattered across both planets. The first was on Eternia, which Skeletor already had. Yet, although he finds and claims the second half, he's interrupted by Superman and He-Man before he can unleash its full power. The sword is left fragmented and then scattered across dimensions once again, with Skeletor tussles with the literal goddess of Eternia. Then the story shifts to how both He-Man and Skeletor are in a race against time to gather the 3 amulets that will lead them to the 2 sword fragments, whilst dealing with an unseen enemy in a sorcerer called Damon. In the end, there's no resolution to this series either, as He-Man and Skeletor's race doesn't end, and the goddess is left as the last great power standing. But it did give us some important lore bits. Most importantly, the DC series introduced He-Man's alter ego as Prince Adam, something that every subsequent He-Man production has stuck to ever since. It also introduced the concept of his lineage and there being a problem with it, which is later expanded upon through Skeletor's character. And it turns the conflict between Snake Mountain and the rest of Eternia into a war that truly feels cosmic by including Superman and Earth into the narrative. Golden Book's Skeletor, 1983. The Golden Book's version of Skeletor is pretty much identical to the other 2 versions we've discussed so far, with one glaring exception. He actually manages to terrorize He-Man far more than the other 2. These books were released around the same time as the Filmation animated series, so it follows the same design aesthetic. But unlike the film series, each story in the Golden Books edition of He-Man is self-contained. That means each story is a complete narrative in and of itself, and loosely connects all the other stories through characters alone. The chronology might not be consistent, and the content might be all over the place, but they still form one cohesive universe of content. Golden Book's Skeletor had a strong opening, I'm not gonna lie. He started off these books by essentially dividing and nearly conquering He-Man's allies. And by conquering, we mean defeating them. In the second book, titled The Thief of Castle Greyskull, he somehow steals Castle Greyskull from He-Man along with both pieces of the Power Sword, but is defeated before he can decipher the castle's secret abilities. There are editions where he and He-Man are in a bit of an arms race. For instance, Skeletor recruits the monsters created by a meteor shower in Meteor Men, and then steals a dragon egg from He-Man in The Secrets of the Dragon's Egg to raise it as his eternal enemy. He even tricks He-Man and his allies into thinking he's a hero in the Magic Mirrors, which has to be the most heckin' bamboozling moment of all of He-Man's history. But the hardcover Golden Books are where things get interesting, because those books introduce a brand new backstory for Skeletor. In fact, this is the variant of the Lord of Destruction, whose backstory connects the Hordak, the evil Horde, and Skeletor's now iconic weapon of choice, the Havoc Staff. In the hardcovers, we learn that Skeletor comes from Etheria, a shadow planet that's exactly like Eternia, except it's a haven for dark magic and evil sorcerers. It's on Etheria that Skeletor hitches his ride to Hordak and his evil Horde, becoming the sorcerer's apprentice and learning everything he can about Atheramite, the most powerful resource on all of Etheria. When Skeletor tries channeling the Atheramite, his youth betrays him along with the substance, melting the flesh off his face. But Hordak saves his life by locking his melting physiology into stasis, and also grants him the Havoc Staff to boost his disciples' command over dark magic. That's the first time we get a proper background for the skull-faced menace, and the rest is pretty simplistic actually. Skeletor eventually becomes powerful enough to break away from Hordak, steals a bunch of Atheramite, and travels to Eternia to set himself up as the most powerful living entity. In fact, the final hardcover book brings Hordak to Eternia because he wants to teach this treasonous apprentice a lesson he'll never forget. In a way, the Golden Book's version of Skeletor is the single most important variant of the character, because it introduces pieces of character lore that haven't been removed ever since. And though he never conquers Castle Greyskull or He-Man himself for a meaningful duration of time, he gives him such a run for his money that He-Man no longer feels like the infallible epic hero that he is.
More than enough to deal with you, my old teacher.
Filmation, He-Man and She-Ra Skeletor, 1983 and 1985. For many watching this video, this might feel like the actual OG version of Skeletor. And we can't blame you, we feel the same way. But the thing about animated Skeletor that makes him such a complete character, in addition to the grandiose speeches and the meme moments, is the depth of his character and its journey. Filmation Skeletor's backstory is similar to Golden Book Skeletor's backstory, with a few minute yet crucial adjustments. For starters, he was Hordak's disciple from the start, and part of the evil Horde that crossed dimensions from Etheria to Eternia to attack and conquer it. Hordak was the one who saved his face, gave him the Havoc Staff, and taught him pretty much everything he needed to know about magic, strength, and warfare. It was during one of Hordak's campaigns against Eternia that Skeletor ended up getting trapped in that dimension. Hordak's plan was to kidnap King Randor and his Earthling wife's twin children, Adam and Adora, to force an unconditional surrender. But the kidnapping went awry. Hordak only got his hands on Adora and he left Skeletor to fend for himself. The Dark Lord had the last laugh though, because he simply pointed Eternia's forces to his former base and forced Hordak to flee to the other dimension with Adora in tow. When both forces vacated the spot, Skeletor raised his own standard over Snake Mountain and resolved to conquer Eternia and use its power to then conquer the universe, and perhaps other dimensions as well, like Hordak's for example. The Filmation adaptation was anthological as well for a fair amount of its runtime, but it properly told both He-Man and She-Ra's stories, using Skeletor as connective tissue. In amongst all the misadventures surrounding Prince Adam and his secret group of super friends and Princess Adora's Great Rebellion, we get slivers of information about Skeletor's tale that no other media had touched upon so far. In She-Ra, which was a direct continuation of He-Man, Skeletor briefly teams up with his former mentor when he learns that Hordak has raised Adora as part of the evil horde, and she now has powers similar to her twin. He strikes up a temporary alliance with him in order to get back at her brother, but ultimately that plan fails, and Hordak and Skeletor have another falling out, which becomes permanent. In fact, Skeletor chases Hordak into his dimension and tries taking that over as well. For all the comedic moments he gave us in the animated series, Skeletor also showed flashes of tyrannical brilliance, which, combined with his iconic look, made him one of the most memorable fictional characters of all time. This makes it even sadder that his send-off from He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was perhaps the most forgettable when compared to every variant we've discussed so far. All the others at least got to keep a foot inside their final He-Man storylines. Filmation Skeletor wasn't even in the final episode. His last appearance was in the penultimate episode, where he used magic to make the animals of Eternia go crazy and turn on its natives in his latest harebrained scheme to take over the planet and defeat He-Man. It feels anticlimactic, and it's not at all the ending we'd have come up with for him, which is a theme you might find is recurring in this video. But this variant of Skeletor builds on the skeleton laid down by the Golden Books and the Masters of the Universe Bible of 1982 perfectly, which is why he's lived the longest in people's memories. And keep that Bible in mind, because it's going to become relevant pretty soon. Skeletoids, Mini Skeletors, the animated series. This one deserves a separate entry, despite being part of the two shows we just mentioned. Actually, it technically deserves 1,000 more entries if we're going to look at it individually, because there's an episode in the He-Man animated series where Skeletor creates a duplicating ray to make dozens upon dozens of small duplicates of himself in the hope that this will finally give him the edge he needs in his war against the Eternians. Skeletor's logic was no doubt unassailable in his own mind. He was the best commander and soldier he knew, so why not make an army of himself? This was also a great example of the scientific aspect of Skeletor's characterization that was made more commonplace by the Filmation series. In the pre-Filmation era, Skeletor was more of a clean-cut, dark wizard-type character, but Filmation turned him into as much of a scientist as he was a sorcerer, giving him this technological advantage against He-Man that he's used to give himself occasional edges in their war over the years. The duplicate ray was one of the many patents Skeletor could have filed, but we're glad he didn't, because what's a good piece of technology that doesn't work as intended? Oh, he managed to capture He-Man and bring him into his lair with his mini-knees, and bolster the ranks of his evil warriors. But He-Man turned each mini Skeletor against each other by exploiting their egos so easily, it felt like a masterclass in knowing your enemy. For a brief moment, there were at least a dozen Skeletoids, or mini Skeletors, whatever you want to call them, fighting each other for control of Eternia. He-Man exploited this opportunity to get into the duplicating ray, make two duplicates of himself, then take their help to destroy the ray itself. Funnily enough, all the duplicates produced by Skeletor's machine, quote-unquote, disappeared, which means that these variants didn't even live long enough to create personal identities. But they existed and interacted with each other and were tangible up until the device that created them was destroyed. So the Skeletoids are one of those Easter eggs that you don't initially realize is a variant until you look closely at the definition itself. Then you realize that autonomous mini duplicates should count as variants by default. UK Comics Skeletor, the Living Skeleton. This version of Skeletor is the one we had in mind when we told you guys that you need to keep the Masters of the Universe Bible in your heads. That's because this version of Skeletor comes from the planet Infinitia, which was replaced by Etheria in most major continuities geographically speaking. In the UK comics published by London Editions, Skeletor was part of a race of skeletal beings that came from Infinitia. He made a name for himself as the evil and sadistic Living Skeleton, and this caught the eye of Horde Prime, aka the leader of the evil horde. He invited Skeletor to academia to study the dark arts under his trusted lieutenants, so that he may become a useful part of the evil horde someday. Skeletor's assigned mentor was, no surprise, Hordak, and they developed a rivalry in the series as well. Hordak hated this new up-and-comer, and Skeletor wanted the old-timer out of his way. When Hordak commanded him to destroy a planet in a solar system he was planning to conquer later, Skeletor beat him at his own game and curried favor with Horde Prime. He was sent to the Dark Dimension to learn black magic, and over there he created a suit of armor that was far more sinister than what we'd seen him in before. Skeletor eventually left Hordak for dead after returning from the Dark Dimension, and was recognized as one of the universe's 3 most evil tyrants, after him and Horde Prime himself. Skeletor was granted the opportunity to conquer Eternia to really prove his worth to Prime, and because Eternia had a magical boundary around it and the forces of evil couldn't cut through, Skeletor succeeded where others had failed, yet even he couldn't draw out the secrets of Castle Greyskull. Ultimately, Hordak returned to power. Skeletor had to fight a war on 2 fronts, and he decided that seeking newer pastures is worth more than dying. This kind of pragmatism and patience was a marked departure from his previous variants, and Skeletor's decision to travel to the Triax solar system and raise a new army to conquer the universe in his own sweet time is something that future versions of the He-Man story pick up on as well. If you ask us, UK Skeletor was needed to bring back some seriousness to this character, because often in the animated series, Skeletor would fail in ways that made children laugh. That was why that show was created, after all. And UK Skeletor reminded us that no, He-Man is actually quite a dark and gritty dystopian science fiction space opera with both science and technology getting equal importance. It's a nuanced world with nuanced issues, or at least the one that London Editions came up with is. We're just glad that the rest followed suit. Keldor's early hinted version. 1987. This is the first recorded acknowledgement of a connection between Skeletor and the Eternian royal family, and it comes to us through yet another mini-comic part of the 6th series of He-Man's action figure, titled The Search for Keldor. In that story, King Randor, He-Man's dad, who's alive in most versions we've discussed so far, wonders what happened to his brother Keldor all those years ago when he disappeared into a different dimension on his quest to learn magic. This happened on a rare night when the boundaries between dimensions weakened for about an hour. And then we see Skeletor brooding in his dimension, thinking that no one should discover the truth about Keldor. The implication here is simple. Keldor is Skeletor, which meant that He-Man has been fighting his uncle this whole time, and that the greatest villain of this franchise is related to the hero by blood. As Randor thinks about his long-lost brother, he's attacked in Castle Greyskull by Skeletor himself. The boundaries between their worlds probably weakened to the point where such an attack became possible, despite Greyskull's enchanted nature. While Adam fought Skullface's minions outside, his dad somehow survived inside, and the story ended with Skeletor going back to his dimension, while Randor wondered if he'd have to wait a full year to meet his brother again. Comic creator Stephen Grant said in later years that he planned a bit of a Darth Vader moment for the Keldor Skeletor reveal, but before he could write it, the toy line was pulled by Mattel, and so was the mini-comic. This variant of Skeletor might not have cackled for a long time, but it dropped the bombshell on our heads that in some ways is still going off decades later.
You will live!
1987 movie Skeletor. This is perhaps the only variant of Skeletor that actually got things done right off the bat and actually became what he kept threatening to become in the other forms of media, the God of the Universe. The 80s live-action adaptation of He-Man might have had its flaws, but the one thing it delivered on was a no-nonsense, yes, dictatorship version of Skeletor. Honestly, we can't even call him Skeletor because technically he looks more like Red Skull with white skin. He isn't entirely skeletal, as he has eyes and lips and a hint of a nose, and is played by the wonderful Frank Langella. He's swapped out the blue skin suit and the purple accessories for black and silver armor. And at the very least, movie Skeletor's cowl actually makes him look like the Grim Reaper, and not just a caricature. At the very beginning of the film, Skeletor successfully captures Castle Greyskull, and the only reason he delays claiming its power is because he wants to rub it in He-Man's face as much as he can. He-Man and his friends slipped off to Earth during his assault on Greyskull, so Skeletor sends 2 forces after them to bring them back and witness his glory. And what glory it is, because in the film, Skeletor actually syncs up with Castle Greyskull's energy and is briefly transformed into a living god. His armor becomes golden, his hood turns into a crown, and the visage of Greyskull itself and his power explodes. That sequence where Skeletor commands a captured He-Man to kneel repeatedly will live on in our memories, if not real memory. And the only reason he's defeated is because He-Man uses a power equivalent to Castle Greyskull, and that is the Sword of Greyskull. In this continuity, the Power Sword is replaced by this sword in the hierarchy, and He-Man defeats Skeletor by breaking his Havoc Staff, which was his link to Greyskull's power. He then chucks Skeletor into an endless pit within the throne room, presumably the endless moat that surrounds Castle Greyskull. But the post-credits scene shows us that he somehow survived and promises to be back. Those promises weren't fulfilled, but this movie did give us a more confident and authoritative take on Skeletor, and a unique look that future variants try emulating.
Time for you nice folks to meet the real Skeletor!
New Adventures Skeletor, 1990. Despite being a part of a series that's a direct continuation of the Filmation animated series, the Skeletor from New Adventures of He-Man, aka Galactic Skeletor, feels like a completely different entity. A lot of that has to do with the fact that Mattel updated the character designs for several Masters of the Universe toys around 1989, and one of those characters was Skeletor. If you think that the red eyes and the actual bone-white complexion he has throughout this series are off-putting, you're not the only ones. We thought Skeletor looked more funny than menacing as well, and that's just the beginning. The entire premise of New Adventures makes it feel like a deliberate science fiction spin-off created to keep up with the sci-fi boom, because why else would the franchise return to the Triac solar system in a completely different time? In New Adventures, Planet Primus is under attack from the New Mutants of Denebria, and Primus's Galactic Guardians decide that they need help from a legend of the past. They send two of their best, Captain Hydron and Lieutenant Flipshot, into the past to bring this legend, aka He-Man, to the future. When they reach the past, they receive a transmission that they think is from him, but is actually from Skeletor, who nearly siphons off all of Castle Greyskull's power by using Hydron and Flipshot's spaceship as a vessel. When the real He-Man arrives, he blasts Skeletor with his powers so hard that he nearly dies, and then goes into the future with Hydron and Flipshot to help out their reality. Castle Greyskull's transformative powers now reside within the spaceship, so it's rebranded the Eternia, which becomes part of He-Man's transformation trigger as well. And Skeletor augments his body with cybernetics to not only protect himself and enhance his strength, but also to keep up with the technology of the future. He-Man becomes the protector of Primus and Skeletor the champion of the Denebria, as he allies himself with Flog, the leader of the mutant invaders. New Adventures is the first series that ditches Skeletor's iconic look for a more futuristic update. His blue color scheme is replaced with purple in the initial episodes, and then the series settles on giving him a massive skull-shaped motif to wear on his chest while his armor takes on black or rust as its colors. He also creates the Skull Staff to channel his magic, which, turns out, is still useful in a futuristic society. New Adventures is one of the only He-Man adaptations that doesn't have Skeletor as its main villain, because yes, he's technically still He-Man's nemesis, but New Adventures storyline also includes Flog, whom Skeletor serves alongside. That's a subordinate position we've never seen him assume in other He-Man adaptations, at least not by choice. And while Denebria invades and occupies Primus multiple times throughout the series, it never fully conquers the planet. He-Man and his allies, and his new AI hologram version of Sorceress, always find a way to bring him and his mutant friends down. Hell, towards the end, he tricks He-Man into landing on a planet whose inhabitants hold death games and permanently imprison the victors as trophies. The mutants take this as an opportunity to invade Primus, but of course, He-Man is released and he returns to spoil Skeletor's plans at least one more time. After it's revealed that Primus and Denebria have a peace treaty in the works and that Skeletor is the one holding up its signing, seeing as Flog wants the treaty more than he does, He-Man and his companions stuff the Skull-Faced Menace into a escape pod using magic, disconnect him from the Skull Staff, and send him packing into space. The idea is that without his magic, Skeletor won't be able to stop the pod or escape, even as he promises to do exactly that. And then the series ends. Skeletor was always a master manipulator and tech head, but in his New Adventures variant, he shows us just how far he could take those interests in the name of ambition and revenge. For that alone, he's one of our favorite Skeletor variants.
I am Skeletor, Overlord of Evil!
2002 He-Man Skeletor, Young Mike Productions Skeletor. The Skeletor of the 2002 He-Man and the Masters of the Universe reboot is widely regarded as one of the franchise's most complete and tragic interpretations of the character. Produced by Young Mike Productions, the series almost canonizes the backstory that had been hinted at for decades. That Skeletor was once Keldor, the ambitious sorcery-practicing half-brother of King Randor. What makes it fall short of doing that is, of course, cancellation, because He-Man 2002 was taken off the air before Season 3. This is why Keldor remains an Eternian obsessed with overthrowing King Randor's regime in the series, because his actual lineage was going to be revealed in the scrapped season. Still, the show at least gives Skeletor's backstory more bones than him being a bag of bones. Seeking to seize control of Eternia, the blue-skinned Gar warrior Keldor launched a coup against the pale-skinned rulers of his world. In order to augment his powers, Keldor associated with sorcerers like Hordak and even traveled back in time to bring Evil Lyn to the present, who also becomes his lover/future rival. The biggest obstacle in Keldor's struggle against the throne was Captain Randor, He-Man's father, who was as stubborn in doing his duty as he was great at performing it. During his confrontation with Randor, he hurled a vial of corrosive acid intended to kill his rival. Randor deflected the attack, causing the acid to splash back onto Keldor's face and leave him mortally wounded. Desperate to survive, Keldor turned to Hordak, the ancient ruler of the evil horde. Hordak saved him through dark sorcery, and the process transformed him into Skeletor, stripping away much of his humanity, both figuratively and literally, while amplifying his hatred and ambition. This version of Skeletor retained memories of his former life as Keldor, making him a deeply personal enemy of Randor and Adam, yet introducing a unique complication that left the door open for an eventual team-up. Although the series ended prematurely after 2 seasons, planned stories would have revealed Hordak's return after Skeletor betrayed him and forced the Dark Lord into an uneasy alliance with He-Man against a full Horde invasion. As a result, this variant of Skeletor is one of the most intriguing and enduring adaptations of the character, seeing as the focus on him was just as high as the focus was on He-Man. MV Creations Skeletor. MV Creations Skeletor was an extension of the 2002 reboot continuity. During that show's run, MV Creations released several tie-ins that expanded upon storylines that the television series never had the opportunity to explore. These comics acted as a bridge between episodes while also delving deeper into Eternia's history, magic, and political conflicts. Because the animated series was canceled before many of its long-term plans could be realized, the comics became the primary source for further development of the 2002 incarnation of Skeletor. This version retained the tragic origins established in the cartoon. Keldor still transformed into Skeletor through Hordak's intervention, but the comics introduced the influence of Demo-Man, a demonic entity, on a much larger scale. They stated that Skeletor's body was actually possessed by Demo-Man, and this is the first and only version of the character that has an overtly supernatural element in its creation. It also explains the struggle between Skeletor's past memories as Keldor and his current lifetime as well. Time travel adventures allowed readers to witness events from Keldor's past and examine how different choices might have altered Eternia's destiny. For example, with Keldor ending up as king instead of Randor. The series also expanded the mythology surrounding Hordak, the Snake Men, and other ancient threats, placing Skeletor within a larger cosmic struggle. Unlike many previous incarnations, MV Creations Skeletor was portrayed as both a ruthless conqueror and a figure haunted by his former identity. His ambitions remained focused on power and vengeance, yet traces of Keldor lingered beneath the surface. The comic line ended in 2005 before reaching a definitive conclusion, leaving many of its mysteries unresolved, but it confirmed the one connection that's influenced the backstory of every future variant of Skeletor. DC New 52 Skeletor, Eternity War 2012. The New 52 variant of Skeletor was presented as one of the darkest and most politically charged versions of the character. In this continuity, Keldor was established as the elder son of King Nero, giving him a legitimate claim to Eternia's throne. However, his mother belonged to the blue-skinned Gar race, making him a target of prejudice among Eternia's ruling elite. When Miro chose the fully human Randor as his successor instead, Keldor's resentment grew into bitterness and eventually open rebellion. Keldor initially served as Randor's advisor, but sought to overthrow his brother and take the throne that he rightfully believed was his. While on the verge of death, thanks to a curse placed upon him by their father, Keldor stabbed Randor and used his blood to become Skeletor, with the aid of his mentor Hordak. DC Comics transformed Skeletor from a simple villain into a tragic figure, shaped by discrimination, betrayal, and personal ambition. Throughout the Eternity War storyline, Skeletor proved himself a master strategist, more than capable of challenging both He-Man and the cosmic powers that protected Eternia. His most shocking act came when he murdered the sorceress after she attempted to undermine his plans, a loss that no other He-Man adaptation had dared to do. Despite suffering setbacks afterwards, as is common for him, Skeletor remained one of Eternia's most dangerous forces. The series concluded without fully resolving his story, hinting that unseen powers were manipulating events behind the scenes. But for what it was, the New 52 variant of Skeletor was one of the most complete versions of the character, with accomplishments that didn't feel like they could be turned into memes, which is a serious upgrade from the past. DC Universe Crossover Skeletor 2013. Following the events of the New 52 Masters of the Universe comics, Skeletor found himself transported beyond Eternia into the wider DC Universe. This crossover variant retained the same origin and personality established in the New 52 continuity, bringing his ruthless ambition into direct conflict with some of DC's greatest heroes. For Skeletor, the new world represented an opportunity unlike he'd ever encountered. Instead of merely conquering Eternia, he could potentially dominate an entire universe filled with powerful beings. Upon arriving on Earth, Skeletor quickly attracted the attention of heroes such as Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and the rest of the Justice League. Unlike many villains who underestimated Earth's defenders, Skeletor recognized the immense power at their disposal and sought to manipulate events from the shadows before launching direct attacks. His mastery of magic gave him advantages that many DC heroes were unprepared to counter. The crossover emphasized how dangerous Skeletor could be despite being removed from his traditional setting. Even among cosmic threats and superhuman villains, he remained a formidable strategist, capable of challenging legendary champions. However, his ambitions ultimately exceeded his reach. Faced with the combined efforts of He-Man and the Justice League, Skeletor was eventually defeated and contained. Though unsuccessful, the crossover continued to demonstrate that Skeletor's threat extends far beyond Eternia whenever he gains access to new worlds and new sources of power. He-Man Thundercats Skeletor, 2016 to 2017. The He-Man Thundercats crossover from 2016 gave us one of the most ambitious and aesthetically unique versions of Skeletor ever created. Seeking power beyond anything available on Eternia, Skeletor turned his attention to Third Earth and the supernatural forces that served Mumm-Ra. Rather than confronting these entities directly, he manipulated the ancient spirits of evil into believing their goals aligned with his own, so he could achieve his ultimate objective of seizing the Power Sword, becoming the master of the universe, and ruling reality itself. Throughout the series, Skeletor demonstrated remarkable cunning. He successfully deceived allies and enemies alike while exploiting the rivalry between He-Man and the Thundercats. Yet, his pursuit of power eventually pushed him toward an even more dangerous transformation. Through dark magic and mutual ambition, Skeletor merged with Mumm-Ra, creating the monstrous being known as Mummator, capable of wielding the Power Sword and the power of Greyskull stably and fully. Mummator combined Skeletor's intellect and magical knowledge with Mumm-Ra's ancient supernatural power, becoming one of the strongest villains either franchise had ever faced. The fusion threatened both Eternia and Third Earth simultaneously, as the two worlds were put on a collision course with one another, forcing an unprecedented alliance between He-Man and Lion-O. In the climactic battle, the combined power of the Power Sword and the Sword of Omens overwhelmed Mummator. The resulting blast destroyed the fusion and disintegrated both Skeletor and Mumm-Ra, ending their threat once and for all. Injustice Skeletor, 2018. The Skeletor variant in Injustice vs. Masters of the Universe was a fascinating fusion of Eternian villainy and DC's dystopian superhero universe. Following a devastating defeat at He-Man's hands, Skeletor found himself transported to Apocalypse, where he was left broken and dying. There, he encountered Darkseid, who immediately recognized the value of a cunning sorcerer capable of manipulating powerful heroes. Rather than allowing Skeletor to perish, Darkseid restored him and dispatched him to the Injustice universe. His mission was not simply conquest, but psychological warfare. Skeletor understood that Superman's authoritarian regime rested on fear, control, and emotional vulnerability. Exploiting these weaknesses, he attempted to manipulate events in ways that would destabilize both Superman and his enemies. Unlike the other variants of the character, this Skeletor spent much of the story acting as a schemer behind the scenes, rather than a powerful battlefield commander. His intelligence made him dangerous even among DC's most powerful figures. Nevertheless, his arrogance ultimately proved fatal. After his manipulations were exposed, Superman confronted him directly. The encounter ended swiftly and brutally, with Superman killing Skeletor outright. Though his role was relatively brief, the Injustice Skeletor variant demonstrated how effectively Skeletor could function in a universe dominated by gods and superheroes, relying on deception and psychological manipulation rather than overwhelming force. If only someone told him all about this in the 80s, right? He-Skeletor, Heroic Keldor, 2019 to 2020. Among the strangest and most beloved variants of Skeletor is He-Skeletor, also known as Heroic Keldor, originating from Anti-Eternia and the Masters of the Multiverse storyline. This version of the Skullface exists in a reality where Keldor never followed the path that would transform him into Eternia's greatest villain. Instead of becoming consumed by hatred and ambition, he grew into a noble warrior dedicated to protecting his world. When the multiverse came under attack from Anti-He-Man, a power-obsessed version of Adam who'd killed several other He-Men and taken their power swords for himself, Keldor was recruited into a desperate alliance of heroes drawn from countless alternate realities. Although initially lacking the legendary power possessed by many of his allies, he displayed courage, leadership, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right, words that can rarely be associated with regular versions of Skeletor. These qualities ultimately earned him the right to wield the power sword of his universe, and upon claiming the sword, Keldor transformed into He-Skeletor, combining the iconic skull-face appearance of Skeletor with the heroic power traditionally associated with He-Man. The transformation created one of the most visually striking figures in franchise history, and symbolized the possibility that even destiny destiny can be rewritten. As the conflict escalated, Skeletor emerged as the central champion of the resistance. He ultimately played the decisive role in defeating anti-He-Man and saving the multiverse. In a franchise built on rivalry between He-Man and Skeletor, Skeletor stands as proof that Keldor could have become Eternia's greatest hero, rather than its greatest villain, and that the opposite could have been true for Prince Adam as well. Revelation Skeletor 2021. Masters of the Universe Revelation serves as a direct continuation of the classic Filmation continuity, while adding new layers to the series' history, which includes a brand new makeover for Skeletor. Voiced by Mark Hamill himself, this variant of Skullface initially feels like a familiar scheming overlord audiences have known for decades. However, the series gradually reveals a surprising truth. Skeletor has completely forgotten that he was once Keldor, thanks to Hordak. In this version of the character, Keldor was initially raised as a loving and willing part of King Randor's family. In fact, his banishment to Amwat Gar was painful for him, his father, his stepmother, and his half-brother Randor. The only reason Keldor was banished was because he was a half-brood born out of wedlock. Otherwise, he'd have been the rightful king of Eternia. And while Keldor took his dismissal and his new post as protector of Gar with grace, this also proved to be the point that changed everything for him. Amwat Gar was eventually attacked by Hordak's horde, and Keldor wasn't just defeated, he was brainwashed into believing he never existed. When Hordak gave him the Havoc Staff, he altered Keldor's memories as well, and thus an Eternian prince became Skeletor, the Lord of Destruction. But that wasn't his only form in this series. Driven by an obsession with ultimate power, Skeletor orchestrates a complete scheme centered on the mystical energy of Castle Greyskull. His first attempt to conquer Greyskull fails, but not without results. Skeletor manages to put King Randor in a coma, and Prince Adam accompanies him to the grave as they try and fail to contain the overwhelming strength of the Power Sword and the Orb of Power. Even after appearing to die, he continues manipulating events from the shadows by disguising himself as Spikor. His plan culminates in the theft of Greyskull's power, transforming him into the godlike Skelegod, complete with a behemoth form and flowing green light emanating from his body. In this form, he finally achieves the unimaginable dream that had motivated him throughout the franchise, becoming vastly more powerful than He-Man and gaining control over Eternia itself. Yet, absolute power proves unstable. After he's inevitably defeated by his nemesis, Skeletor finds his home, Snake Mountain, covered in organic and inorganic hybrid lifeforms as he contends with the motherboard that Hordak has unleashed on him to control his life. For a time, Skeletor becomes Skeletech, a machine hybrid of his original self, but he eventually breaks free of the motherboard's control and finds the unlikeliest ally for his response to Hordak and the Horde. Skeletor teams up with He-Man to defeat the motherboard, and after being proclaimed the King of Eternos, reveals that he regained his memories as Keldor a while ago. This is the point where his downfall begins in earnest, because even though he claimed supreme power, Skeletor can't stop looking for revenge. By the end, while he does avenge himself upon his former mentor and the man who tortured him by making him think he's a demon, Skeletech Godtor's divine energy is stripped away. His mechanical augmentation is incinerated, leaving only the mortal shell of Keldor behind. Defeated and imprisoned for treason, this Skeletor experiences one of the most complete rises and falls in franchise history, and a full story arc for the first time across all of his variants. Most others' lives and stories were cut short due to external factors, but Revelation Skeletor truly lived a complete life on screen, and that makes him the most well-rounded version of this character. Netflix CGI Skeletor 2021. The CGI He-Man and the Masters of the Universe reboot reimagines Skeletor for a new generation, while preserving the core tragedy of Keldor's transformation. In this continuity, Keldor is the younger brother of King Randor and the uncle of Prince Adam. Ambitious and fascinated by forbidden power, he becomes obsessed with the Havoc Staff, an ancient artifact tied to destructive magical forces. A decade before the events of the main series, Keldor attempted to harness the staff's power for himself. Instead of granting him complete control, the artifact cursed him. The corrupting Havoc energy transformed his body into that of a living skeleton, creating the being known as Skeletor. Like many previous incarnations, this version's appearance is directly linked to magical corruption rather than a physical injury or demonic intervention. Throughout the series, Skeletor serves as a relentless threat, whose schemes revolve around acquiring greater magical power and defeating the heroes of Eternia. However, the story ultimately takes a more redemptive approach than most versions of the character. Rather than killing him, Adam manages to purge the corrupting Havoc energy from Keldor's body and soul. The transformation is reversed, restoring him to human form and effectively ending Skeletor's existence. But we live in a post-credits scene world, and Netflix Skeletor can return at any point in time. At the end of the series, Beastman recovered the Havoc Staff, which leaves open the possibility that the darkness could someday return. But apart from that, this has to be the most black and white variant of Skeletor across all his depictions, simply because the corruption element was at the forefront instead of lurking in the background like it usually does. Turtles of Greyskull Skeletor 2024. The Turtles of Greyskull crossover introduced a new chapter in Skeletor's long history of interdimensional schemes. Published by Dark Horse Comics, the story united the worlds of Masters of the Universe and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, creating an opportunity for Skeletor to expand his ambitions beyond Eternia. Recognizing the potential benefits of cooperation, he forged an alliance with the Shredder, one of TMNT Universe's most notorious villains. Although both villains sought power, their partnership was built on mutual self-interest rather than trust. Skeletor viewed the crossover of worlds as a chance to exploit new magical resources and technologies, while Shredder sought to strengthen his own position through access to Eternian power. Predictably, the alliance escalated into an even greater threat when the two villains became fused into the monstrous hybrid known as Skele-Shredder. Combining Skeletor's sorcery and cunning with Shredder's combat skill and ruthlessness, Skele-Shredder represented a danger neither universe could confront alone. The fusion forced heroes from both franchises to cooperate in ways never seen before. Ultimately, the combined efforts of He-Man, the Masters of the Universe, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and their allies succeeded in separating the two villains and defeating them. Regardless of the defeat, this crossover gave us an extremely cool Skeletor variant and reinforced a recurring lesson from his career. Every time he seeks greater power, his ambition ultimately becomes his downfall. 2026 Movie Skeletor. The live-action Skeletor of the 2026 Masters of the Universe film represents the latest cinematic reinvention of Eternia's greatest villain. Portrayed by Jared Leto, this version places Keldor firmly within Eternia's royal family. He's depicted as the half-brother of King Randor and therefore the uncle of Prince Adam, creating a deeply personal connection between hero and villain. According to the film's premise, Adam has been absent from Eternia for nearly 15 years. During that time, Skeletor seized power and established himself as the world's ruler. This scenario presents a very different status quo from the previous adaptations, allowing audiences to encounter an Eternia that's already spent years under Skeletor's domination before the story begins. Director Travis Knight described Skeletor as the embodiment of toxic masculinity, which shines through in Leto's performance that emphasizes insecurity, domination, and the destructive pursuit of power. The characterization is designed to preserve the villain's classic arrogance, while grounding his motivations in modern themes. When Adam returns to Eternia, Skeletor doesn't rush to kill him, letting his minions handle that petty job instead. Their final duel sees Skeletor break the Power Sword with his Havoc Staff, but Sorceress appears within Adam's mind and convinces him that the power of Greyskull is in him, not the sword. After reconstructing it, Adam reverses Skeletor's blast on him, which disintegrates the guy, and the film ends with Adam's mom ruling Eternia, seeing as his dad died in prison, and Adam taking on the name He-Man for his heroic ventures. In a post-credit scene, we see Adam's sister Adora fighting in the Fright 1 on Etheria, and Evil Lyn retrieving Skeletor's skull, which suggests that the character might return in a future She-Ra film. Regardless of the ending, this incarnation stands as one of the most ambitious attempts to reinterpret Keldor and Skeletor for a live-action audience, because he actually ruled Eternia for a while. Live-action Skeletor 2.0 might just be the most successful version of this character. Having said all that, we hope you guys enjoyed this video, because those are all the Skeletor variants we could find. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this one. And while you're at it, ring that notification bell so when I bring you more He-Man content, you'll have the power. We'll see you guys with yet another video real soon. So until then, stay safe and stay marvelous.